superstars, welcome back to another episode of Word Up with Danny Katz. Today I am joined by Word Up podcast favorite Michael Wann. Michael reached out to me when he saw that I was grilling other astrologers on the Cusp question. And as always, Michael and I had an amazing conversation that delved deep into the sidereal versus tropical conversation and all the other implications. Before we dive in, I'm reminding you to click that subscribe button, to like, to share, to comment. I'd say click the notification bell, but I'm not sure it really does anything. The best way to stay apprised of my video offerings, podcasts, books, courses, webinars, live events, all the things is to sign up for my newsletter at dannykatz.com. I'm also reminding you how our show is structured. First half is free on all of the podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. The second half is available for my paying supporters at both Locals and Patreon, where for as little as $5 a month, you get access to all of my second half conversations, plus oodles of bonus content, opportunities for swag, and tons more. So choose the platform of your choice, links in the show description, or choose both, because abundance is such a fun frequency in which to play and dance. I think that does it for housekeeping. Buckle up and prepare to enjoy my conversation with Mr. Michael Wann.
Hi, how are you?
I am. How are you?
I am.
There seems to be a special kind of crazy out in the world today. Yeah, it's crazy. I thought Pluto getting the fuck off my sun would chill things out a bit. I feel more chill, but the world is still insane.
The world is always insane, right?
It's a new level, I think.
What can you tell me? What specific? Can you give me a specific example?
Okay. My morning massage client totally no-showed, like no call, nothing. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to take this opportunity to dart into town to do a quick errand. I go to the grocery store. This woman legit cuts in front of me. Like I'm so clearly ahead of her. And I'm like, it seems like you're in a really big hurry. Yeah. I just have to go. So I'm like, okay, go ahead. And even the cashier was like, I'm so sorry, that lady was crazy. Then walking to my car, this car's not looking, but talking to another car and slowly moving towards me. So I'm like, what's going on? And the other car's like, are you going to run this lady over? Like, what are you doing? Then I get a 16-minute message from my quadruple Cancer friend telling me that the quantum languaging reflections I gave him on his ADD triggered the shit out of him and I need to shut the fuck up. And I'm just like, I'm just going to go back to isolating and not be with humans today.
All right. Well, I don't know if I'm human, so then I guess I'll fall in that. Or actually, I think I'm the most human. I think that other people aren't. I don't know.
Do you ever question whether you are human?
Like, I don't know what human means. Like, this is what I know for certain. I'm not like the other folks.
Is there anyone that you meet where you're like, oh, we're from the same star system or dimension or something?
I mean, I can meet most people. Like I can be very receptive and passive. And so like I'm able to find that level with most people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm comfortable with them. Right. So your question is a little bit tricky for me. Do I think people maybe? Yeah. I mean, I would say you, and like, I feel that way with you. Like, I feel we speak the same language. So maybe that's more so like how I would frame it. Like, I speak the same language with you. I speak the same language with Emily. I've put out enough weird content that typically the people who I interact with on a regular basis, you either like it makes sense to you or not. So maybe I've like created a big enough filter that I don't interact with people who don't fit that, and that, or who don't understand at least the way how I see things. And then when I'm around regular folk, I don't really say that much. Like I'm able to just meet them at their level.
Right.
So I don't know if that's just like my earth coping mechanisms or what, but like, so I don't know. I don't even know if I don't even know if I subscribe to these ideas of even like outer space systems. I mean, I don't know what any of this stuff is, but I just try to find enjoyable times, I guess. It's all like, I mean, my life is so crazy right now. Like, are we recording? I hope we're recording.
We're recording. I mean, I know we haven't even done a pre-show because I know you reached out saying like, let's do a show, and I want to know what you want to talk about. But what you just said is confirming what I've been playing with recently, where like, as I learn to be more well socialized and to relate better, what I realize it means is like keeping my mouth shut and keeping my internal discomfort to myself, so that I can like go along with whatever the like dominant socializing on hand is unfolding as.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, like for me, like a little insight into my inner world. I mean, and maybe all people who are like us were the same way. Like I learned at an early age to be able to be like to interact well with other folks. And it served me, like, you know, like I was always like a popular kid, and like, though I was never short of friends, but I don't think I was ever truly, like, I always sense like, you know, I see things differently, even as a young child, not even knowing how I see it differently. And then as life unfolded and as I moved away from a more mainstream lifestyle, and I was able to explore and express maybe ways how I wanted to be in reality, I had already kind of learned how to interact with people and create like that safety, that buffer, because people who know, very few people I think know me well, because I keep a really strong buffer. I know a lot of people, and a lot of people I think they know me well, but you know, I don't know if that's a healthy thing, you know, what's healthy, but like, I don't know what that implies, but there's a very, very small group of people who really, really are deep, you know, have deep insight into how I am. And that has certainly afforded me, avoided a lot of headaches, I suppose, from just like on a day-to-day basis, but maybe like it postpones, like, you know, true connection with a lot of people. I don't know. I think I have true connection with like with a handful of people, but I'm able to create like healthy boundary or healthy interactions with the majority of folks.
I was not born with that skill. I definitely did not have that skill in school. Years, like maybe a decade ago, I found a bunch of old report cards at my mom's house from like Montessori school. And they're all like, she doesn't really socialize very well, doesn't really know how to handle her emotions, doesn't really know how to engage with others. And I was like, Mom, why didn't you guys do anything about this? Like, why you were getting feedback. But what I realize now is that it works well for me to socialize. The more I disappear, the smoother it's going to be. The more myself I am with most people, that really doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, we've got different flavors, I suppose. Like, I mean, part of, I think, what makes Danny is like how, you know, where you stand with Danny. Like, if I was going to critique me as an individual, it's like, you don't know where you stand with Mike.
Which is like, so, I mean, from my perspective, and I appreciate you saying that, like, for me, that feels more vulnerable when I don't know where I stand with someone. Like, it's scarier and edgier. I'm from, you know, from an external perspective, I feel like it's very kind that people know where they stand with me. There's no guesswork. It's all on the table.
I would agree with that. I would say that it's considerably and I think this is true for all people as they, you know, mature or fill out the gaps in how they interact with themselves in reality. And like, whatever whatever your like dominant strategy is, you want to balance it out. So it's like, for me, like being more transparent with what I'm saying, because it's easy for me to just like not care. And so that's something for me, like over the past 5 or so years, like becoming more comfortable with finding that balance, with being more transparent, at least with the people who I care about. And I would say like each person is going to go and find that counterbalance to like whatever their natural way is. Like, as you're saying, is like, well, like maybe softening some of that stuff or disappearing. That was the language you use, like maybe disappearing a little bit. Because I could disappear, no problem.
Yeah, it seems to work well if I just like pull my energy in really tight and nod and pretend like everything's okay and I have no opinions or thoughts. That works well. It's super boring, but then I can say like I socialized. It's all
Right.
weird. So
The work which I think which we do, like I often think about the perspectives, the information which I share. And I think of there's a handful of other people who I think are doing something similar to me, not necessarily specifically the same details, but their role in the group. And I would say, I always think of you as one of those people, and like your area of like focus is like with words. And then also I often think about like how strongly, and I concur immensely about like disassociating your physical body with a number, like all of that sort of stuff. Like I do similar things with time and other stuff. And we have different approaches, and that's I think that's necessary, because like, you need to have all of these different sort of ways in which like folks who are from a certain generation, where we were born into a certain generation, and we find ourselves in a certain place in life, in a certain platform to share what it is that we have to share. And we have to do it in a variety of ways. So it would make sense that we would have different sort of approaches.
Mhm, mhm. So, Michael, what inspired you to reach out? What is top of mind? I feel like there's something that you're wanting to share, and I want to know what it is.
All right, so this is what it was. I guess it was like 2 weeks ago, a week ago, I don't even remember. A friend of mine needed some help with their parent, their father, who lives at home, and he has in-home care, and she was out of town, and he was supposed to cover blah blah blah. So I filled in a little bit of a gap, and I'm in the house, the guy's still sleeping, and I was bored, and so I decided to scroll through Instagram on my phone, something I normally don't do, and I saw one of your clips. And it was, I don't know the person who it was you were interviewing with. It was a woman. And what I heard you say, because you do these blurbs, I think you do it really well. Like you entice people to want to go and see what the conversation is about. And the conversation had something to do with cusps. And you said, I want to get a variety of astrologers together, and I want to talk about this cusp thing. And I had no idea what you're even talking about, but it intrigued me, because I was like, what is it that they're discussing about cusps? Because the level where what I really want to talk about, what that intrigued within me was this idea. What I find very important right now is as we're doing with so many things, deconstructing astrology. Like, astrology is another one of these sacred cows, and there's something of significance within astrology, but there's a lot of like, the same sort of mind control, which is applied to all sorts of things, is also applied to astrology. So that was really what the motivator was, because like, I want to talk to you about this. I want to at least share my voice as it relates to that sort of stuff. We can talk about astrology, and I'm always interested, like we love to talk about time. So that was in my mind. But what was also interesting, because I like to see the secondary confirmation of feedback in, you know, experiential reality. So I watched that video. I'm like, I haven't spoken to Danny for a while. And like, let me reach out. I'm intrigued. Like, you know, I felt it inside. I'm in this house. I'm bored. It's a beautiful house, like beautiful house out in the woods in eastern Pennsylvania. And I go and I see, I think this was right after I reached out to you. You responded to me immediately. I saw there was a handwritten note, like with an address, like on my friend's, she has an office out there, and it was in your hometown. I was like, okay, well, there's like the secondary thing for why I know that you and I need to have a conversation. So that was my motivator for wanting to start this conversation with you, because I always know that whatever it is that triggers a conversation with you and I is just like a entry point, because it always goes in lots and lots of different areas.
It does. Yeah, it was, I'm so glad you reached out. It was super synchronistic for me because I'd started this non-monogamous inquiry into cusps or bullshit with different astrologers. And as I've talked about with all of them, you know, I had Pluto sitting on my sun since March, which has been a total mind fuck. And while that was happening, like any ambition that I used to have completely disappeared. So any sort of authentic drive to like lend my voice to any, you know, larger cultural discourses kind of went away. So I was just going through the motions. And when you reached out, I was like, I don't have anyone scheduled on my podcast. I also kind of don't care. Maybe I'll just stop doing it. And it was perfect because you're the fourth astrologer that I've spoken to about cusps, and you're probably the easiest person to talk with who I have on the podcast because we're just so in alignment and it goes lots of places. So it helped. It gave me one of those like, everything's okay, everything's aligned. You know, just hold the line, keep doing what you're doing. So I'm super happy to dive into the cusp conversation with you.
So can you bring me up to like, when you say cusp, or where that came out, that conversation, bring me up to speed and we can go from there. Can we do that?
Yes. So my whole life, I've been told that I am on the cusp, and I'll tell people I'm an Aquarius. They'll ask my birthday and they're like, oh, you're on the cusp. And I'm like, like it
January
feels like
21st, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
it feels like I'm being lumped in like this, like homogenized with the Capricorns. And I'm like, I don't feel that. I don't feel that I'm on the cusp, especially as 0 degrees. I feel actually quintessentially Aquarian. And my naturopath, who's also a friend of mine, is born January 20th. And he is a lot more agreeable than I am. And something came up about our birthdays, and he said, I reject the idea of cusps. I am not on the cusp. I'm 29 degrees Capricorn, and I prefer to be honored for that. And I was like, it's always so nice for me when someone else is like the difficult person, or someone else is the contrarian. I'm like, oh, I'm not the only one. So I felt like it gave me permission to question this cusp sham and what it's all about.
Okay. So just I'm assuming everyone who's watching this has some idea of or knowledge of astrology. So just to be clear, like a cusp represents like the line which separates like one sign to another or one house to the other. It's like the demarcation, right? If you really, this is my conclusions of playing with astrology, like being an astrologer, whatever that means to other people, for some period of time. The conclusion I reach is this: like a lot of astrology, like there is an accuracy to it, but I don't know about the truth to it. And we could get into that statement a little bit later, but this is where it's like really, really easy to go and begin to like question this cusp concept. Half the astrology world follows sidereal placements. Mm-hmm. Half the astrology world follows tropical placements. And if you were to go and talk to like anyone who's long time committed to either one of those placements, they'd probably be able, and if they've been thoughtful about it, they'd probably be able to explain to you why it is that they follow one particular school of thought versus another. Maybe they could even go back and forth between the two. In a very similar way, that if you were to talk to and I use this word with quotation marks around it, like, a real Jew or a real Christian or a real Muslim, you'd be like, well, I want to pick a religion, but which one should I pick? And they'll be like, well, this is why I think that mine is the right one, or this is at least the reason why I subscribe to or follow the practice. So there's truths to that. People get something out of it, but they're inherently contradictory. So your placement, your sun placement at 29 degrees, where's your sun? So it's 21 degrees, that's at the end of Capricorn, right?
My sun is 0 degrees Aquarius.
0 degrees, yeah, 21, yeah, that's where I got confused from. In Sidereal, that's just in tropical. That exact placement, January 21st birth, is like, that's going to be off by 24 degrees. It's going to shift 24 degrees in Sidereal. So then the question becomes, well, which one is it? So like right there immediately tells you like that cusp concept is only true in a tropical perspective.
Wait, hold up. So are you saying that from the sidereal lens, cusps don't exist?
No, the cusp is somewhere else.
Okay, but so cusps exist in sidereal, they're just in different places?
Correct. So imagine this. So you're in New Mexico, right?
Correct.
And I don't know this for certain, but I'm going to make this assumption. I bet you at some point the state, maybe it was once called a territory of New Mexico, the borders were different. Let's say in 1854, the borders were different than they are today. Like maybe it was all under Texas.
Mm-hmm.
That border line is a cusp. And so you're like, well, what is the cusp line? Like, well, I've got the border and the cusp are one and the same. I can look at New Mexico's borders in 2023 and I say, this is the line that separates New Mexico from Arizona. Or I could go back in time and I'd be like, well, in 1854, the line was somewhere else. And you're like, well, it's kind of both, but at the end of the day, they're both concepts.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up borders. And so real quick regarding the sidereal, and maybe you can unpack this a little bit more. I've danced between, well, cancel, clear, delete. I've had long conversations with people who are devoted to sidereal in the same way I've had conversations that are with people who are devoted to tropical. From my experience, it's less like we learn equally about both and make a choice. It's more like, where were we indoctrinated? Where like what was the culture that we were brought into? And then we just continue because there's a momentum there. As I understand it, and I'm very curious about your take on this, the sidereal explanation of Capricorn or Aquarius is going to be very different from the tropical characteristics or markers of those signs.
You mean like archetypically?
Correct.
Like that's going to depend. This is where the whole thing, like you start to see how convoluted it is.
Right.
You can look at your chart in sidereal or tropical in Western astrology. Okay. And typically, I've never heard of anyone who follows Vedic astrology who uses tropical, but I'm assuming you could. There could be an archetypical difference between Capricorn, between Vedic and Western. I see them as more similar, but you can go and do that. But if you are looking at sidereal placement versus tropical placement within a Western astrology concept, they're the same archetypes. They're the same archetypes. So do I have share screen capability?
I'll give it to you. Let me ask, according to sidereal,
I'd like to show something to you, So I don't think there is a truth, there is an accuracy with understanding one's astrology. And I think the word which you used is so perfect for this, is like the unpacking of it, to really begin to understand what it is and why it is accurate, and why someone can be like completely devoted. The reason they're devoted to tropical, or the reason that they're devoted to sidereal. Like, yes, I do agree with you about the inertia, but if they're thoughtful about it, they're also going to see a truth about themselves, or they're like, this is shown to me to be accurate. Like, we can get into that unpacking, but I first want to go and maybe show this right here. So has this shown up? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What we have here, this is a photograph which I took outside of a house which I was living on September 20th, 2021 at 9 p.m. Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Okay. So this is actually what's in the sky. And so what we see right here, this is the tropical chart of that same time. So this is really, really interesting to be able to do that. So here we have the moon, and this is where the moon is. And then Jupiter was visible and Saturn was visible. It may not be too easy to see in this image. That's Jupiter and that's Saturn. And when you look at the tropical chart, you can see this where Jupiter is and this is where Saturn is. They're about 16 degrees apart. And then we have the moon down here. And we see it in tropical. We see that Jupiter and Saturn are both in Aquarius. So I just superimposed the ecliptic, the tropical ecliptic over it. And we can see that the moon is right on the cusp, right? We've got a cusp right here between Pisces and Aries. And so we see it right there. All right. So this is like literally happened. There's no interpretation. This is the sun, or this is Saturn, this is Jupiter, this moon, this is where they're at. So now let's go and look at this. It's the exact same picture, right? Same picture. And now I pulled up sidereal chart. Sidereal chart has the same thing. We've got Jupiter right here and we've got Saturn right here. They're also 16 degrees apart. These two are 16 degrees apart. We got the moon here, which is probably like about 35 degrees further east from Jupiter. But now we've got Saturn in Capricorn, and we've got Jupiter in Capricorn, whereas before they're in Aquarius. Now Jupiter is right on the cusp. You know, this is right around where your birthday or your sun cusp is. And we've got the moon like right in the beginning of Pisces. Mm-hmm. Nothing changes between where the moon, Jupiter, and Saturn are in actual like experiential reality. The only thing that changes is what is the costume we put upon them.
But are the definitions of the costume the same in both of these systems? Or these
yes, they are. So, I mean, the archetype of Capricorn doesn't change. Like Jupiter in Capricorn in sidereal will mean the same thing as Jupiter in Capricorn in tropical.
So let's just take it from, and I do want to come back to the border thing, but let's just take Pisces and Aries. Pisces is the last sign in the zodiac. That's the same sidereal tropical, right?
So Pisces is the last sign in the zodiac. Yes. Yes.
Okay. And Aries is the first, right?
Correct.
So and I'm just riffing off the top of my head. So I see Aries as confrontational, aggressive, bold, initiatory, creative, very young, right? It's the first sign. It's the youngest of the fire signs, very childlike. Pisces, I experience as very slippery, very secretive. Cards are under the table, whereas Aries wears things on its sleeve. So where do we resolve that in one of these systems, what we define as Aries will be defined as Pisces? How do we differentiate the characteristics that mark these different beings or archetypes?
All right. So now you're starting to ask, like, those are really those are great questions. And so I want to take a step back before. So you just mentioned the 12 signs, right? And so probably around 2012, like it became like a really big deal in astrology. Like they're like the 13th sign they've been keeping hidden from us for all these years. And now we've got the 13th sign. They introduce Ophiuchus, right? You're familiar with this?
No, please catch me up to speed.
So that was just like a big deal in the astrology world. It's always been there. But there was like, they introduced like how it was told to like a person who is following astrology, like, whoa, everything you know about 12 sign astrology, that's wrong. There's a hidden sign. There's a hidden sign between Scorpio and Sagittarius, and it's called Ophiuchus. And it changes everything. Like, it's that simple. Like, it's that malleable. The entire system is that malleable. So,
well, if it's true, is that true? Is Fucus, like, what element is Fucus? Like, it upsets the balance of the whole thing.
You are so correct. So what most people did was like this is, in my opinion, watching this, when you added the Ophiuchus into it, like there's a novelty. We is like, you know, the way we've been conditioned to hold our mental spaces, we like novelty, right? And so it's like, ooh, it's sexy. And Ophiuchus, it's hidden. It's like, I'm not supposed to know about it. Now I know about it. And now, like, so there was that. And so people got excited about it. Well, first off, if you're going to, all they did was they added they included a constellation. It's a grouping of stars. There's a grouping of stars that make up the ecliptic. And I mean, in theory, there could be 13 signs, there could be 144 signs, there could be 2 signs, there could be anything, right? Like, the assumption is that like 12 is standard. 12 is standard because we've been born into it. This is the inertia before tropical and sidereal. The inertial is 12 signs. So we saw that that first thing we see by the introduction of Ophiuchus is that, oh, it can change overnight because they told us there's a new sign, and there's a truth to it. They're like, there's a constellation, but there could be a million constellations, like, just because. So we know that that's flexible. The second thing is, if you add in a 13 sign, the entire idea of 12 sign astrology is based upon duality. Aries is opposite Libra, and they're like two sides of the same coin. Like, Libra is like, you know, you and the other. Aries is the individual. Like, and so now I got a 13, like, there's not that opposite. So there's like, you're beginning to see how astrology is very, very malleable. Like, I know a lot of people who like are like really, really strong about like the 13th sign is like, you know, like it changes everything, and it's even more accurate than the 12th sign.
Who's the they that gave us the 13th sign?
Who's the they that gave us the internet? Who the fuck knows?
In-Q-Tel.
So quick little thing on Mike Wann's history. The first professional job I had, this is like 1995. The guy who, it was a small little startup technology company. He was on the board, the first board of directors of In-Q-Tel. Like, the company which he started was always an In-Q-Tel company. So I'm always like, you know, who am I? Like, what was I working with? But we could go down that path if you really want to get down to. But here's the thing, Danny, because I think you're asking such like these are the questions which I think are so important as it relates to astrology. So like, this is you on Earth, and we've got this thing which they call the ecliptic. It's what all of the planets rise and fall. You know, if you're standing here facing south, on the east is where the sun rises and it sets in the west. The moon rises, sets in the west. All the planets do, even though they orbit this way. And there's a fixed backdrop of stars, and they were broken down. And this fixed backdrop of stars, which it's a racetrack, which all of the heavenly bodies go across. That's called the ecliptic. Mm-hmm. And once the ecliptic was divided into knowable sections, that is called the zodiac. So the ecliptic would be like North America, And then the zodiac is when you take North America and you apply borders and you say, this is California, and this is New Mexico, and this is Pennsylvania, and so forth. They're arbitrary, but there is a truth to it. And they also provide a value. Like, you know, like borders are helpful to knowing your bearings. Like we don't want to necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, but this is part of like understanding and deconstructing like what the astrology is. So where was I going with this? So here we have, this is the ecliptic divided in 12 signs. Here it is divided into 13 signs. It could be divided into all of these different signs. All of this originated. Where did all this begin? This all begins in Babylon.
Okay.
You know, same people who gave you taxes, same people who introduced government, same people who introduced banking, slavery, you know, all of that, like it all comes from the same place.
Well, hold up, because it says there's speculation that astrology of some sort appeared in the Sumerian period in the 3rd millennium, but isolated references. I mean, wasn't Babylon, if that's the case, then an argument could be made or an idea could be purported that it started off pure until the Babylonians came in and decided to invert and enslave and whatnot. I mean, wasn't Sumeria a little bit more pure than?
I mean, I paint with broad strokes. And so I say the Fertile Crescent's the Fertile Crescent.
Okay.
So in my mind, I look at this as very similarly. And so, yes, you could see right
didn't
here.
Babylon give us geometry and architecture as well?
Exactly. I don't think it's as simple as like throwing the baby out with the bathwater as much as it is like, that's why I said like the word to really apply to this is unpacking.
Mm-hmm.
It's unpacking. It's like, yeah, there's geometry and there's like, so. And a lot of this is going to come from like, what is the inertia of the individual who's going to apply? Like you asked such a great question. Who is the they? I don't know. I don't know who the they is. What we're doing is we're recognizing like where we are. This is the way, this is the conclusion which I have reached, you know, whether or not it's accurate, whether or not I'll change my conclusion in the future, who knows? Like I change my mind all the time. But it is, the first thing is we recognize that it's a mystery. Maybe at one point it wasn't a mystery, but I think it is always a mystery. We don't know where we are. We don't know, like, you know, they tell us it's Earth. Like they also tell us it's computer simulation. They also tell us we're a cell in God's body. Like, I don't know. What I do know is that I'm kind of alive, tied to a body, and there's solid ground beneath my feet, and I can see the sky above my head, and they show me a lot of pictures, and they say, this is what it really is. So whatever, like, it's like, I hold that, and like, I just don't know. It's a mystery. What I do know is that we're seemingly all like the same thing, which we call Earth, whether it's flat Earth or spherical Earth or hot dog Earth, whatever it is. The unifier, which we all share, the great unifier of humanity on this thing which we're calling Earth, is the heavens. And what I mean by that is we all get to see the moon. It doesn't matter where you are on Earth, you see the moon. I'm assuming it's the same moon.
We know that though? I mean, you've been to Antarctica?
I don't know.
Have you been behind the ice wall? Right.
Possible. You may be correct. I've never been to Antarctica. I think there's an Antarctica, but I don't know. And I don't know if they could see the moon. But I do know that every place I have been on Earth, I've seen the moon. And we all seem to agree about that. But what I also know is like I haven't seen the Indian Ocean. I know there are people who haven't seen.
I have. That's a nice ocean.
But it's not everyone on Earth gets to see the same things on Earth, but we all on Earth get to see the same sky. So that's why I say it's a unifier.
Unless it's a projection.
That's possible.
Which I think so often where I just, you know, because so much of this reality, we're trusting our senses, but our senses are distorted by our belief systems.
Bingo.
And so we don't know shit.
Okay. So I am on the complete same page as you, but you got to start with somewhere. So that's why I was saying, like, I use the words conclusions, right, and why I'm willing to change once I get better information. as of right now, like the best thing I've seen about the projection on the sky is like, what's the Crow 777's like the lunar wave. Like that's a real like, whoa. But I'm not certain what that means yet. Like, you know, just because I saw him Crow 777, like, and I don't mean this anything disparaging to Crow 777. I just mean like, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. You should say the same thing about me. That's why I think unpacking is really the interesting sort of word about this. Like we're trying to figure this out. So this is what the conclusion I've reached. There has been a huge story projected upon the heavens, which is the unifier. And that story is, and that's basically what astrotheology is, right? Like, you know, all religions can be broken down to astrotheology. And it's seemingly broken down to like a battle between whether it's day and night or summer and winter, like, you know, the extremes. And they're told through like all the different sort of ways. So a narrative has been applied onto the heavens. So like that seemingly has happened. I also know this about our realm of experience. This is a placebo realm. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy realm. This is a realm that whatever you believe, whatever you identify with to be true, you're going to, like, that seems to work out. Like what, like that is more true than there being a fundamental truth. The fundamental truth is what you believe. So that's where it's like this, like, dog chasing its tail sort of thing, like happens. So it's like the person who has identified with or has believed upon their sidereal chart or their tropical chart, like they've seen a truth into it. I know, and so we can go a little bit deeper. I want to go and throw this one last thing, and then I want to hear some of your comments. So to me, a lot of this is experiment. It's an experiment of being live. I know my tropical chart, and I know to some extent, like my personality, like how I present myself or how I presented. And what the tropical chart says of, you know, the idea of Mike Wann, it lines up. And when I look at the sidereal chart, I'm like, that don't seem like me.
Right.
But it should be me. It should be me as much as true as the tropical, at least like looking at a chart. In fact, you could even make a more valid argument that you should be more tied to your sidereal chart, because sidereal chart reflects what you actually see in the sky. Mm-hmm. Like the tropical chart, like where it says the planets are, if you know your constellations, they're not in those constellations as tropical. They're in they're closer to the sidereal one. So like it gets a little bit freaky that way. Because I was born in the Western culture. I was born in North America. Whether people recognize this or not, like we are an astrological culture. This is why in the Capitol building, there are 13 zodiacs. This is why when you go to the lobby of the Federal Reserve, there's a big zodiac like in the ceiling. This is a zodiacal tropical viewpoint of reality. That's what North America is. And part of what we understand about this realm, which we are experienced life in, is that your consciousness naturally becomes what you're born into. The proof of that is the language. No one taught you your first language. You naturally, your brain wires to whatever they speak. No matter how many languages at home, you will become that, or that is not limited to the language. It's like we become all of that. We become the culture. So we're born into a tropical culture. I became that. That's what at least makes sense to me. So that being said, I've been trying on, like, what would it be like now if I became my sidereal chart? What does that look like? And I'm doing that in a practice. It's just purely an experiment. Like that could be just as much true. Or I could even reject the whole thing. I call it natural astrology. I practice natural astrology. You know, I say this as a joke religiously, but as a way to step out of false time. But all of this stuff, like these are attributes of the system which we are living in. And it seems to be much more about a self-fulfilling prophecy as opposed to like a fundamental truth. But it's accurate.
It's super accurate. And there are plenty of people who don't know anything about astrology, but when we look at their charts, we see that they're living their blueprint.
Right.
So they're not necessarily fulfilling a prophecy that they know anything about, but at the same time, it's a collective prophecy, and we are all part of the collective. We cannot be separate from the collective.
I think we can wake up as individuals to I would say, so we are running on autopilot. Like this is part of the, why is the indoctrination so fucking strong? Right? Like this is like to hold consciousness on a certain trajectory, or maybe it's like once you become aware, like it's like a subliminal advertising only has impact or effect upon consciousness when the aware mind and the unaware mind are not in communication. So that when one becomes aware of starts to deconstruct, starts to question, starts to unpack, like all of the things that are built-in assumptions into our experience, like their power begins to dissipate. Just like when someone points out the subliminal advertisement in an ad, like it no longer has an internal charge. That's what I've seen to be true.
I'm feeling into that because I very often find myself playing along with collective. Just take like polarization, and there have been moments where I've seen myself getting triggered and caught up in a highly charged or programmed or mind controlled topic where I'm like, I don't even care, but I've been hooked in with the same virus that's hooking in the rest of humanity, even though I know that there's a virus there. Do you know what I'm saying? That there are landmines in these conversations. So in my experience, I've noticed that sometimes my awareness of that doesn't necessarily let me off the hook as far as my detachment around it.
Well, I mean, it starts somewhere. So it's like think about like anything which you're quote unquote addicted to, right? Like if there's anything which you kind of do unconsciously, and then you start to realize, like, I don't want to do that. Like, let's say like a food or a drink or like any sort of substance. You may as one begins to detach themselves from that cycle, they're going to recognize like, oh, I feel like that's a trigger. I recognize that thing like triggered me, and now I'm craving something else. I still got the friggin' craving, but at least now I'm more aware of a process, and that might be the first step. We've been, we've been in the system since the moment we've taken our first breath. So it's like, what are we comparing it to? Like, I like to think about this. Like, I get overwhelmed visually very, very easily. Like, particularly when I'm driving. Like, when there's too many signs, like that's difficult for me. Like if like I come around all of these different signs, road signs and all these different things, like it overwhelms me, like having to process that information. So I know that there's something within the way that I process information, that too much stimulation does something to me. And so down that line of thinking, like I've often wondered, like, how many times have I seen, how many stop signs have I seen in my life? How many times have I seen the word stop? Like, and I'm saying me, but we can apply this to ourselves, like, countless, infinite times, like, and like, the question is like, well, what does that do to my consciousness? Because I know that I get overwhelmed sometimes when I just see too many signs driving on the highway, like, these lanes go here and there and all the words. And I'm like, well, what is a smaller thing, like the consistent of stop, 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 stop. And at the end of and I asked myself the question, like, well, what would I be like had I not seen that stop sign a million times or infinite times? And the answer is like, I don't know, because I haven't had the experience. I can't compare that. So like, I think part of what you and I are doing right now, and I think this is, I mentioned this in the beginning of our conversation, was like, I think there's certain people who are doing things like in terms of offering information to the collective. And it's like a recognition, not like we know the answers, but we're beginning to see the cage that we're in and not realizing like, well, what is the full impact of it? But there's a cage that we don't even realize we're in. So I don't know like what it would be like not to have all of these impacts. I just know that they do have impact on me. And by becoming more and more aware of the inner process and seeing it, it creates more space, I mean, to move out of it. And I'll say one last thing. Who is the they? Like, I don't know if this is an answer, but I find this as like a nice answer that makes me feel good, is the only way I feel like this type of thought is a deconstruction of how consciousness and this realm works. And the only way to learn it is by figuring it out. And so like the whole idea is like the they is us. I'm like, well, I guess maybe that does make sense, because this would be the environment we would have to create in order to really see how consciousness and the self-fulfilling prophecy and how all of these things work, by creating the worst experience possible to figure it out.
I mean, I get that one aspect of the they, but in terms of dropping a piece of disinformation into the collective consciousness to confuse, control, create dissonance, that is also going on by people who might be part of our they or not part of our they. I mean, I am curious to know if that resonated with you on an intuitive level, like the announcement of a 13th sign. Was there a part of you that's like, yes, that is truth?
I mean, realistically about me, that affected my natal chart immensely, because all of a sudden my sun went from Sagittarius to Ophiuchus, if I wanted to go by this model. And so that satisfied that like ego, that like, oh, I'm special, like, you know, ooh, this is fun, this is novel, like there's a truth to that. And then like, I think that takes a little bit unpacking and realizing like, I was seduced by it. I was seduced by the excitement. I mean, what I'm suggesting right now about astrology is really, really friggin' difficult for people who know about a lot about astrology to accept, for a variety of reasons. But primarily, it's like, I've invested so much time learning the system, and I've demonstrated my value by being an expert in this. And now, like, it's not expert. Now I'm not. Who am I without my expertise? I mean, I think that's up to each person. If you've had enough collapse within one's life, one more collapse is easier to accept. So like, yeah, like I was seduced by it. It felt true. I thought it was interesting. And like, I wanted to dive into it, but I think I wanted to dive into it probably because, it appealed to my ego.
And I think that, and I so appreciate that, because I think that's probably the biggest trap that I see in myself and a lot of people with astrology, is how easy it is to identify. Where from my perspective, at least the game I'm playing is unidentifying, and I'm well aware that identification with my own astrological chart is probably where in this moment I'm still gripping the hardest. So sidereal versus tropical, again, I don't know enough about, I just find it so hard to believe that the definitions would be the same. In tropical, I have 4 planets in Aries in the first house. If we move that to Pisces, like, I'm not that person.
So that's such a great question. So this is what natural astrology is. So let's say you were born at 7 a.m. Let's say you were born at sunrise. So do you know where that would be on the chart, like as it relates to houses?
No.
So that would be the ascendant. The ascendant literally means the east-west horizon. So sunrise would literally mean the sun is right on the horizon, let's say.
Okay.
If you were born at sunrise, that another way of saying it astrologically would be like your sun is conjunct the ascendant. Whether you are in sidereal or tropical, that does not change. That's what that image which I was showing you with the moon and Jupiter and Saturn, that doesn't change.
But the qualities of imprinting are vastly different between Pisces and Aries.
So let's go take a step back. So the qualities are so and let's use language. Let's go use language, okay? Self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, who says about imprinting? And I'm just being devil's advocate right now. It's like, all I know for certain is the sun was on the horizon. I know that if I were to follow a tropical mindset, I would be imprinted with a certain sign. And if I were to follow a sidereal concept, well, then I would have been imprinted with a different one. So that, I think that creates a whole bunch of at least new questions. Like we could do quantum physics questions, like, many worlds model and well, there's a different world where I was in a tropical system or something like that, or a sidereal system. Or to me, this is, I've done this, like this is when I talk about natural astrology, I define natural astrology as astrology without contradictions. So tropical and sidereal, that's contradictions. You're saying I'm either this sign or that sign. When I just hold astrology in terms of what is no contradiction, what doesn't change. If I was born at 7 a.m., the sun is always on the horizon. Like I know that to be a truth. The signs can change. You could add in a 14th sign and a 15th sign, but what never changes is my sun is right there, or my sun is at the midheaven, or my sun is somewhere else. I find to be more true, and therefore having a more solid ground, but then it could all completely fall apart if you tell me it's all projection, but I can't prove that. So I'm going to go and say, like, this is the most solid ground I have, is that I'm going to know the placements of all of the planets, and I use the signs for one thing. It just tells me where I am. Like, I know there's no such thing as New Mexico. I know there's no such thing as Pennsylvania, but I'm able to say Pennsylvania, so you have a point of reference of where I am on the land mass, which we've decided to call North America. I can say that.
I'm going to contradict that.
Okay, please.
Because as I understand the way you're presenting it, it's like, here's the zodiac, and the difference between tropical and sidereal is just how much it's turning, how we're defining the demarcation points. I used to think that borders were completely arbitrary and conceptual. I do a lot of road tripping. When I cross the border from Arizona to New Mexico, or I cross the northern border from Colorado to New Mexico, there is such an obvious difference in vegetation, in landmass, in climate. There's also going to be very obvious differentiations in flora, fauna. Like, that's super real. I can see it with my eyes. I experience it when I plant things, what grows, what doesn't grow, when I need a sweater, if I'm driving north. Like, the borders aren't really as arbitrary as I had thought.
In some ways, I would agree with you. Like there's a difference from one side of the mountain to another side of the mountain. There's difference in stuff like that. Like, those are natural borders, without a doubt. And often we see municipal borders are based upon those. And so that makes sense. And you can feel a difference. I can feel a difference when I drive from Pennsylvania to Maryland. Like, that's seemingly the same land. Like, I can sense that, but that, to me, I think there's a difference. There's a difference. There's a difference between true borders and false borders, like the ones which are built into the landscape. Of course, I don't see any contradiction with that. And if a municipality border overlaps that or lines up with that, then that makes sense. Like, if you're going to go and create a border, well, then that makes sense where you would do that. But then there is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like Maryland and Pennsylvania have very, very different attitudes. They have very different identifications, and that does spill over. I don't think it's a fundamental fact. If there was like some sort of extinction level event and all of the roads disappeared and everyone forgot about that, and then people reappeared, and then that line, which we know of with the separation between Maryland and Pennsylvania, which I can sense the difference when I drive 495 from one state to another, I don't think that would stay. But I do think that like what you're describing between differences of climate or quality of the air from one side of the mountain, like that would stay. Like I don't think it's as, I think it's like complex. I think it's complex, and we have a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning like we've made that true. Like Marylanders identify with being Marylanders, and it feels different just purely from that. It's called an egregore. Like there's a truth of our reality about egregores. We can make things come into reality. But if no one's believing it, if no one's holding that energy, does it stay? I don't think so.